Inflation, threat of war, crime, violence in the street, sexual compromise, political intrigue, neglected children, babies killed, nationalism, injustice sounds like America 2022. But that was first century Rome. I teach history at Morehouse College, and I teach anywhere from ancient history all the way up to the present. And one of the things I love about history are the trends. No matter what changes in humanity with mankind, the essence of man has not changed. We are exactly the same as we have always been. Empires come, empires go. But man has not changed. You know, in Rome, those were ramshackle tenements that were overcrowded, extremely dangerous. Sounds like neighborhoods that some of us know about today. Some of us may have even lived in these type of neighborhoods. There was constant fear of flooding. There was constant fear of fires. And also what the Romans did, like many other cultures, conception of the Jews, if they didn't want a baby, they would take that baby out and leave it in the elements. They would let that baby die. You know, and that's the world that God looks at. But you know, what's very interesting here is how God sees the world. How God sees the world. When people live faithfully with God, God would bless all the nations of the world through them. This is still true today. Jesus stated this clearly in Matthew 28:18-20. We would do well to remember that the most crucial aspects of God's covenant with his people in both the Old and New Testament was that his people were to be faithfully and constantly taught to observe and practice, to live out all things that I have commanded you. As the people obey God's promise, and lo, I will be with you always until the very end of the age. And that's by a gentleman named Henry Blackaby, a cool book he wrote about the prophets. You know, so many times it's easy to look at the world and shake our heads and say, this world is spinning out of control. Things are so bad. And our Gen Zers catch it, because the older we get, we remember how great the world was. In our day, we didn't do such things. Oh, what is wrong with these young adults? The world is out of control. And you know, as God's people, we focus so much on sin that we lose sight of the mission God has given us. And you know, every now and then it's really good to check our hearts. Because in Exodus 19:3-6, then Moses went up to God and the Lord and called to him from the mountain and said, this is what you ought to say to the descendants of Jacob. So as God and Moses are having this conversation, God says, look, you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Moses, I rescued you. So for those of us who are disciples, believers in Christ, there's no room to be self-righteous. God himself rescued us. I brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me and fully keep my covenant, if you obey, it's conditional, fully keep my covenant, he says, look, out of all the nations, you'll be my treasured possession. But why? Why? Why did God choose those people to be a treasured possession? What was so special about the Jewish nation? God says it's not because there's so many of you. It's not because you're so great. I'm giving you a responsibility. You will be for me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. What God was saying in a world that was polytheistic, that had all these different gods, all these different perspectives, all these different viewpoints, he says, I'm going to take one people and I'm going to ask you to join with me, be in a covenant relationship where you obey me and love me, and I will bless you. And guess what? You will be a kingdom of priests. See, priests minister to the people. That's what priests do. Priests look out for the people, the well-being of the people. A holy nation. That means you're going to be set apart. Other people may leave their babies to the elements, but you won't leave your babies to the elements. Other people may be polygamous and worldly and selfish, but you won't live that way, because you'll show people if you live for God, he will bless you. And guess what? Even when they don't obey, if you do what is right, they'll be blessed. What? You mean to tell me if people who are claiming to be the Christians, disciples, live right, that God will bless other people? Wow. That means our lives can be a blessing to someone else. So that's how God sees the world. Well, let's talk about how Jesus sees the world. In Matthew 9:36, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. When we see the crowds, what comes to our minds? When we see the crowds after they're stumbling out of the stadiums drunk, what comes to our mind? When we see the crowds storming the Capitol, when we see the crowds in the streets rioting, picketing, protesting, what comes to our mind? You know what Jesus said in his day? Remember, Jesus came during the time of the Roman Empire. There were crowds, there were gladiatorial games, there were all these vices going on. And Jesus said, these are some lost people. Disgusting the way they live. He said, you know what? Wow, they're confused and they are so helpless. They're like sheep without a shepherd. You know, how do we see the world? That's my question for us today. Do we see the world with compassion or contempt? Those people, how are they living? What is wrong with them? And you know, really, for those of us who are disciples of Christ, there is a higher calling. There's a higher calling for the way we see the world. The most challenging messages that Jesus preached when he walked the face of the earth. It wasn't at the woman at the well. He didn't call her scandalous and da-da-da. He didn't do all that. He said, you need to repent. The demon-possessed men and women, he didn't back away and say, they got problems. Somebody help them. He healed them. You know who Jesus was tough his own? People like me. You're supposed to be a priest. You're a religious leader. How are you doing? See, God's people have forgotten what they were set aside to do. They were so busy enjoying the spoils of being God's chosen people that they lost sight of that they were saved, set aside, rescued out of Egypt so that they could be a kingdom of priests, to be a holy nation, showing compassion to a lost and dying world. Jesus came to remind us. And I don't know about you, but that's convicting. That challenges my heart. You know what Jesus said? You know what? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, all your mind, with everything you got. This is the first and greatest command. Remember that covenant relationship? Love God. That's what it's about, loving God. And then Jesus added another caveat to that, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, that opened up a lot of theological debate. Y'all remember that story? That opened up a huge theological debate. Who is my neighbor? See, before the message of love for all creation, and it was shared so beautifully in the communion, people were expendable. Women were expendable, throwaway. Children were expendable. The only people that mattered in the ancient world were the very rich, the monarchies, and then maybe the ruling priestly class. Nobody else mattered. Even in, I often, as I teach world religions, we have to cover that in world history. We start with Hinduism, then we look at Buddhism, and then we go to Judaism, and then we go to Christianity, and it's always, oh, professor, what about this Christianity thing? How is this any different than anybody else? So that's a good question. Because, college students love to challenge their professors. I don't back away from it. I said, good question. And you know what I did last year, what I did with the guys, I said, let me just read something to you. And I read some of the teachings of Jesus about loving people, about compassion, about care, concern. And they were like, I like that. I like that. Normally now in the past, I would say, well, let's talk about sin. Normally in the past, I would have went in on the pagans about sin. You need to repent. And so many times we can tell those who already know they're in the wrong what they're doing wrong versus grabbing them by the hand and say, let me lead you out, show you another way, give you something else to think about. Because what I learned from my young adults, and we were talking, I said, how many of you guys feel overwhelmed with life? How many feel like it's just too much at times? Just about all the hands went up. I said, the problem is phones, cell phones. You are constantly bombarded with news, and 90% of it is bad. What can you do about an earthquake in Haiti? You are sitting in class, and there's a tsunami in the South Pacific. What can you do about that? And then the Amber Alerts. Oh, my gosh. Be on the lookout. So everybody's frantic and frustrated and stressed out. I say, my day, the 80s was fun. 80s was fun. We had just the 6 o'clock news. We didn't know what was going on in D.C. We didn't know what was going on with this person, that person. All we heard was that, y'all remember Walter Cronkite? Anybody remember the CBS News? Y'all know what I'm talking about, the CBS News? You had 25 minutes of bad news and you went to bed. I mean, that was it. I don't think we were built to know everything. And it's overwhelming. And if we are constantly being bombarded with bad news, you know what? We start feeling like we live in a horrible world. People are out of control. It's bad. It's negative. But God doesn't see the world that way. God says, as long as I got a small group of people who are loving me and in covenant relationship with me, I'm going to bless those who don't even know what's going on. They will be a blessing to them. And you can go back and look at the history of God's people. And even when they were put in captivity in Babylon, God said, you know what, go and have families and build homes. Just pray for the good of the city. But we're in captivity. Pray for it. So to go well with everybody. That's the nature of God. Are you all still with me out there, church? Is this making sense at all? Because, sometimes I wonder if I'm making sense there. One of the challenges of following Jesus is when he got to the difficult stuff. And the tough teachings of Jesus, that's when you really have to reevaluate what we say around here. Count the cost. Do I really want to do this, what Jesus is asking me to do? Matthew 5:43 through 45, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Jesus said, pray for your enemy. Pray for them. When was the last time we prayed for our enemy? When was the last time? Well, first of all, let's define enemy. I think there's some confusion here because this football team is an enemy. Really? This basketball team is an enemy. This rival high school, that's our enemy. We have taken that word enemy and we have put it in such a sports context that I think it's lost some of its meaning. Enemy or foe is an individual or a group that is considered as forcefully adverse or threatening. The concept of an enemy has been observed to be the basic for both individuals and communities. So let's take a little quiz here. Let's take a little quiz, okay? You like taking quizzes? Pop quiz time. Did you do your homework? Okay. Let's take a little quiz. Who is your enemy? How do they look? Where do they live? Who do they date? How do they vote? Do they wear a mask? You know, it's really intense in this country how we have become so divided. And we're in the same country, shopping at the same stores, and we're enemies. And there's this animosity and this anger. If you don't think the way I think, forget look. It's like if you even think the way I think, if you don't agree with me, you are my enemy. And what's really sad is when Christians get caught up in this. When disciples, we take our cues from the world. And let me tell you, there has been enough going on in America. It has been very, very challenging. You know, there is still power. Thank you, music ministry, for singing that song. The problem isn't the world. The world has always been crazy. The world has always been having a rough time trying to figure out how to coexist together. Jesus has already given us the answer. God has given us the answer. But the question is, do we trust that those archaic 2,000, 4,000-year-old teachings are still relevant to our ever-progressing society? We are ever progressing. You know, I hear it all the time. That stuff is old. The world is different. The world has changed. Not really. We're dealing with the same. It's like we're just going around on this merry-go-round. Every 30, 40 years, the same problems pop up. And, you know, the devil plays the same tricks on us, and we fall for it every time. And we're talking about what's going on. I think Marvin Gaye sang that in this. Before my time, I was still. 2020, I'm lecturing virtually. 2020 was a rough year for everybody. Pandemic, social justice issues. And I got these 18-year-olds, and they said, Professor, I said, yeah, we just need to talk. I said, okay. I put the lecture aside. How are you doing? Why don't white people like us? I say, wow. What you mean? They just want to kill us. They hate us. I say, it's tough. It's hard. It's hard. But you know what? It's not everybody. I know some people, they don't hate you. They love you. And I want to introduce you to my friends. I got brothers in my church. That's not how they see you. And then I have a friend of mine, a guy named Jim Linehan. He's on the other side of Atlanta. During all the midst of this chaos, Jim calls and said, how you doing? You're my brother. How you doing? And I was moved. I said, thank you, Jim. Then he took it a step further. How are you guys doing? You know what? I'm coming down there. I want to meet with the staff. I want to check in with the guys. I got a Latin dude on staff, got 2 African-American guys. He said, I just want to make sure they know I'm your brother, and I stand with you. You know, when a lot of disciples were on Facebook and Twitter going off, our people didn't do that because they had an outlet. Because through the church, they realized we're going to deal with this. We're not the world. The world will not set the tone for how we're going to love one another. And you know what? In fact, we're going to face it head on. And we are going to be different because Jesus has already given us the power. You know what Jesus said? The world will know you are my disciples because you got fantastic church buildings. You got dynamic children's ministry. Oh, the world will know you are my disciples because the music is phenomenal. Oh, you got this amazing preaching. You know what he said? If you love one another, which is the toughest thing to do. Jesus said, if you can figure out the toughest thing to do, then people will say, wow, those are Christians. Those are Christians. If we could just figure out. So, and what I had to do, I had to start working on my heart. I had to start praying. I had to start talking. I had to start being open and honest about what I was feeling, the frustration I was feeling, how I'm a minister to these young guys. I'm a minister to my African-American folks without feeling bitter or resentful. And a good friend of mine, he is a CEO of a company up in Atlanta. He said, hey, let's start this nonprofit. Let's call it Peacemakers. And let's you and I work along with Sean and figure out ways how to help people just to talk. Just to have conversations. And he had me come in and do workshops and diversity training for his company. Then there's a company right next door. I did something for them. And throughout 2020, I'm talking to a CEO of one of these companies, and he's going on this journey of working through his issues. He said, you know what? I don't want to be a racist. I don't even like that word, but I know there are things in my heart that I need to work on. Will you help me? And we were having these honest conversations, consistent, not avoiding difficult stuff. We were having conversations. He said, I just don't see it. I just don't get it. Help me understand. And I said, that thing's about your life I don't get. Help me understand. And you know what? It's conversations that lead to transformation. When we take the time to engage, to go deeper than hello, how you doing? What you having for lunch? Just when someone opens the door and says, I just don't understand. Because sometimes we just don't understand. Do y'all understand what I'm saying? We have different cultures. We have different ideas. We have different ways we resolve issues. But if we can just learn to talk to each other. So I had a young man in my class, a dude by the name Cam. And he was hanging out with me, and he's a radical type of dude. He's a radical type of dude. He was for 2020. He was out marching. So he came to class, and I said, "How you doing?" And afterwards, we had a little talk, and I was like, "Well, how you doing spiritually, man? Where do you go to church?" He said, "Doc, I'm not about that." I said, "Okay," but he kept coming to class, and after class, he would hang around and talk. So I just got to know him, and he kept hanging around talking, and I got to know him. And then I said, well, let's go and do something together. Let's go serve. Let's go volunteer. He was excited about that. And then he came with us to a conference, and he was intrigued by our wives. So you had this 20-year-old guy over there with all our wives, just chatting it up, just talking. And I'm like, okay. Well, Cam is studying the Bible now. Cam's studying the Bible. I said, Cam, we laughed the other day. I said, man, how did we get here? He said, I watched your life. I took him up there to talk to the CEO that I was working with. Purposely took him up there, and I said, don't you act crazy in that man's office. He's a friend. You are not going off on this man. Okay, I know how to act. One Sunday, a couple of weeks back, the CEO, Cam and his girlfriend were all in church with us. Relationships. Be praying for his girlfriend. She's studying the Bible. I'm so grateful for my wonderful wife. She's studying with this young lady who's a Spelmanite. And I was talking to them the other day, and they were both out marching and protesting. They were so angry. And now I say, now you get to do it Jesus' way. Now you get to know how to live and learn like Jesus. Dr. King said something that was really profound. Another way that you love your enemy is this. When the opportunity presents itself for you to defeat your enemy, that is the time which you must not do it. There will come a time in many instances when the person who hates you most, the person who has misused you most, the person who has gossiped about you most, the person who has spread false rumors about you most, there will come a time when you will have an opportunity to defeat that person. It might be in terms of recommendation for a job. It might be in terms of help that person to make some move in life. That's the time you must do it. That is the meaning of love. In the final analysis, love is not this sentimental something that we talk about. It's not merely an emotional something. Love is creative, understanding, goodwill for all men. It is the refusal to defeat in any individual. So Dr. King said, we're going to give goodwill to all men. We're not going to defeat a person. We got that opportunity. Oh, boy, I tell you, that's a tough one right there. Oh, you need my help now? Really? Huh. But I remember but Dr. King said, But that's really what Jesus said. When you rise to the level of love, of his great beauty and power, you seek only to defeat evil systems. Individuals who have to be caught up in that system, you love. But you seek to defeat the system. We cannot defeat the system and focus on the macro. We got to go micro and get to know individuals. Individual conversations. Get to know people. Not stereotype, but get to know individuals. And then Jesus said, you know what? Love them. You want to defeat them? Love them. So pray for me because I'm still growing in that area of my life. It's not an easy teaching. And then all of us need to do that self-inventory. Who is it? Who is it that just, we won't say it's an enemy, but we just don't like them. And the test will be now, can we reach out to them in love?